Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be unpacking the Poem of Return by Rocha. So as always we'll start with some information about our poet, because understanding the context of the poem is absolutely critical to understanding the intended message and the background. So unfortunately I couldn't find a lot of information about this poet. So Rocha was born in 1941. His real name is Roberto Francisco de Almeida. He is an Angolan politician, and what's really important to understand is the context of this poem. So if we think about Angolan history, Angola was colonized by the Portuguese, and then during the 1960s, when a lot of other African countries were getting their independence, some African countries were given their independence in a more peaceful manner, and other countries had to really fight for their independence, and Angola was one of those countries who really had to fight the Portuguese. So they're engaged in this war of independence from 1961 until 1974, and in 1974 or 1975 the Portuguese finally leave and Angola is declared independent, but then it launches into a civil war, which is a civil war between people of the same country from 1975 all the way up until 2002. And this civil war is a result of the war of independence, in the sense that the Angolan people joined together to fight against the oppressors, against the colonizers, the Portuguese. And then during the civil war you have all these different groups turning on each other. So Roberto Francisco de Almeida, he is part of the MPLA, which is one of the sort of parties, one of the sort of freedom movements. He was exiled and he spent some time in jail, and so this poem, we can understand it in terms of him returning from exile, or even just a general idea. We don't necessarily know that it's about him per se, but it could be about any speaker, because during this time when there's a war happening, there are lots of people that are often sent into exile, meaning that they are forced to go away from their home countries for reasons usually pertaining to their safety. But being in that space, being in exile away from your country during a really difficult time, when your country is going through war, when your country is going through something difficult, is often very challenging, as one can imagine. You're away from your family, you don't have any communication, and you're also not there to experience the highs and lows with your people. And so this poem, we're going to see, the speaker is someone who has been in exile, or who is currently in exile, and he is dreaming of coming home. Not necessarily dreaming, but he is anticipating coming home, and he wants a certain homecoming which is different from what perhaps one would expect, in terms of, he does not see himself as a hero. He wants to be brought into the fold. He doesn't want to be isolated anymore. He wants to understand what his people have been going through. So I hope that gives you a little bit of context before we actually get into the poem, in terms of Angolan history, in terms of what it means to be in exile, etc. So if we look at the title, Poem of Return, it's very focused on the return. It's not focused on the exile itself, which makes a lot of sense, because it is emphasizing, throughout the poem we're going to see him emphasizing not his own struggles and what he's been through, but when he returns he wants to hear about all the struggles of his people while he's been gone. When I return from the land of exile and silence, do not bring me flowers. So we start off with this stanza which sort of gives us an understanding of the entire poem to come. He says when, and this indicates that he's thinking optimistically, right? It's not if I will return, it's when I will return. So he's thinking positively. He will return. He doesn't know when exactly, but he knows that he will. From the land of exile and silence. Land of exile, this is a foreign place which is devoid of communication, devoid of family, it's isolated. He has no news of home, and that's the idea of the silence. He's been exiled from his country and he doesn't even know what's going on in his country. So notice how he does admit to have experienced suffering in this land of exile and silence, but he's going to realize that his plight, his suffering is largely insignificant compared to those who stayed behind and fought. He says, do not bring me flowers. This is very commanding. It starts with a verb, the imperative. He commands the listeners, do not bring me flowers. If we think about what flowers are a symbol of perhaps celebration. They're used to welcome the homecoming of a hero. The speaker does not want this custom to be applied to him. He does not think of himself as a hero, and perhaps he feels slightly guilty for being away, or he doesn't feel like he should be as appreciated as he might be when he returns home. Bring me rather all the dews, tears of dawns which witness dramas. Bring me the immense hunger for love, and the plaint of tumid sexes in star-studded night. Bring me the long night of sleeplessness, and mothers mourning, their arms bereft of sons. So he's told us he doesn't want flowers, and now he explains what he does want. Notice the repetition of bring me, and bring me. I wouldn't call it anaphora because anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the start of subsequent lines or clauses, and here we have a little bit of a break, but it is repetition. So he is being sort of commanding, or being very direct in terms of what he wants. What does he want? Rather meaning like in replacement of the flowers, he wants all the dews. This is an example of hyperbole. Dew is the droplets of moisture that you see on the ground in the early morning. It is absolutely impossible to go and collect all these little droplets of water. He also says tears of dawn. Think about tears and dews. They're both water-based, water-based things. And if you think about trying to collect water, think about like putting water in your hand. It's difficult to collect. Tears and dews, they represent the tales and the stories which he's missed out on, the stories of the real heroes who have stayed behind, and it's difficult to collect all the different ones. So he's really praising his fellow countrymen because they have all experienced this loss, and he recognizes that he's not the only one to experience suffering, that the people who stayed behind may have experienced even more suffering. Tears have a connotation of tragedy, and he wants the tears of dawns which witness dramas. And here we have an example of personification, because the dawn is being personified, that the dawn has witnessed these dramas, that has borne witness to what's happened. And this really emphasizes, remember, if we use personification, it always creates a sense of power, that this concept now has power because it has it has these human qualities. And it's almost like the dawn is now given the power to be horrified at what it sees before it. If we think of the word dramas, I think it's a bit of an interesting word to use, because if you think of a drama, a drama is sort of theatrical. So it's almost as though the speaker's been away for so long. It's as if the stories have been crafted into dramatic tales of heroism, not just sort of like these big tragedies, but it's almost like this drama. That's how extreme he thinks that these people who have stayed behind, their experiences have been crafted into this sort of story-like thing, or this legend, this drama. I think also it's effective in terms of the use of the word drama because it serves as this alliteration. We have dawns and dramas, the repetition of the D sound, and that's a really harsh sound, and it emphasizes the aggression of these crimes. The dawn has witnessed these terrible, terrible things. If we think of dawn, it's an interesting one because dawn is usually a beautiful time of day. Well, that's how I would typically characterize dawn as sort of like a new day, new promise. And if we think about like in terms of the times of the day where we have terrible things that happen, it would be the night. And by the time dawn comes, then, that struggle is over, or theoretically the tragedy is ended. But by using that the dawns are witnessing these dramas, it's almost like the dramas do not end at night. There is this continuation of struggle, even in the dawn, even during the early morning. There's these horrifying events that are taking place. And the fact that the dawn witnesses it just sort of also indicates that sort of helplessness that the country has had to see its people suffer so terribly. Bring me, repeated, the immense hunger for love. He wants, immense means great, hunger implies this yearning or this desperateness for love. He wants human connection. Remember, if he's in exile, he's isolated from everyone. He wants the love of the people, of his fellow countrymen. He wants this human connection. And the plaint of tumid sexes in star-studded night. And plaint is like a plea or a lamentation, and tumid means swollen. So he longs for romance and intimacy. He longs to be with his people. He longs to have the sense of human connection, on this very intimate level. And I think you can see this as reference to his love for his countrymen, but also maybe his love for his country. He wants to be immersed in his country again. He wants to be there. He wants to experience the pain alongside his fellow people, and he wants to feel that connection to them. Star-studded night. If you think of star-studded night, it is associated with romance and intimacy. It's a romantic thing, to go and witness the star-studded night. But I think also, if we think about this speaker being in exile, being away from home, if we think about Africa, we always think of that star-studded night. We think of the beautiful African sky. That's what it's known for. And so he wants to be immersed in his country. Bring me the long night of sleeplessness, with mothers mourning their arms bereft of sons. So another request that he has, he wants you to bring him the long night of sleeplessness. Notice that it's long. Their suffering is long lasting. But also notice the singular use of night. He doesn't say bring me the long nights of sleepless. I mean, he has plural mothers. Mothers are mourning their sons. But he doesn't say that there's long nights of sleeplessness. He says there's one singular night. And it's almost like all their individual pain has been morphed into one nationalistic and unified sense of struggle. So within horror, the horror of war, you have a sense of community in terms of all your suffering becomes one, and it becomes this long night of suffering, of sleeplessness. When you can't sleep, you're restless, you can't come to terms with something. Notice the enjambment in these lines. Sleeplessness with mothers. That enjambment emphasizes the continuation of their suffering. Remember, enjambment is when the line doesn't end on a punctuation mark. It sort of continues as the run-on lines into the next line. With mothers mourning, the alliteration there, the repetition of the M sound, emphasizes this troubling mood. I think it's really interesting that he's used mothers and sons, because I sort of think of this poem in reference to war poetry. If you think about war poetry, there's often that imagery of mothers mourning their sons and wives mourning their husbands and children mourning their fathers. And that's all really like emphatic and relevant. But the fact that it's just reference to mothers and sons here, not wives or daughters or husbands, I think it serves to emphasize how young and innocent and heroic the dead are. So the people who have died for their country, in this case, these are sons. And so by seeing them as sons, we're seeing them as maybe more vulnerable, and maybe their sacrifice being all the more extreme because they're seen as children. Their arms bereft of sons, bereft meaning deprived or lacking. They're left without their sons who have been killed, fighting, exiled, or imprisoned. And my assumption is that this poem is with regard to the War of Independence, because that would make sense for someone to be exiled during that war and for so many lives to have been lost in this fight against colonialism. When I return from the land of exile and silence, no, do not bring me flowers. Bring me only just this, the last wish of heroes fallen at daybreak, with a wingless stone in hand and a thread of anger snaking from their eyes. There should be a full stop at the end there. I'm sorry I didn't put the full stop on the slide for some reason. So when I return from the land of exile and silence, here's repetition. And he adds in the word no before he says do not. And this emphasizes this forceful tone. It emphasizes his resistance of being treated like a hero. He does not want to be treated like a hero at all. He says, do not bring me flowers. And then we have this ellipsis, the 3 dots, and this leaves out why. And I think that maybe this is sort of, it could be a reference to the fact that maybe this poem is longer, but if we just see it in terms of it as a poetic device, it's almost like we should focus on how we should honor the people who have fallen, not focusing on my struggles and my plight. But as I said, I don't know if this is left out information, but it could also refer to the sense of him saying that he wants to focus on the plight of others. He says, don't bring me flowers. He's not going to get into his whole tale. Let's rather continue on what you should bring me and why, what we should be respecting, or what we should be focusing on. Bring me only just. Only and just mean the same thing. So using them next to each other is a form of redundancy. And it just really emphasizes that he only wants one thing. That's the only thing he requires. He wants the last wish of heroes. Think about what we said about knight being singular. Here, once again, we have the singular, the last wish of many heroes. They all have a singular desire, and that is a free country. And these heroes fallen at daybreak, these heroes who have fallen, this is a euphemism, right? Because it is saying something unpleasant in a more pleasant way, that they've fallen, where actually we know that they've died or been killed in a dramatic fashion at daybreak. Once again, a reference to dawn. And if we think about what dawn can represent, or what daybreak can represent, it's sort of like these men were at the start of their lives. If you think to war poetry, that's also a common thread in war poetry that we see. It's almost like these young men were on the brink of something exceptional. They were on the brink of finding or starting their lives. These are young people with promise, with dreams, and this is this lost opportunity that they can't live out their future. It could also refer to maybe a daybreak. If you think about it, it's like just as the tide is turning, just as nighttime is ending and there's morning and there's some sort of hope, then these men die. So it's like the speaker is trying to honor these men who fought and who died, whether it's at the start of their lives or with the end in sight, and they still had to sacrifice their lives. With a wingless stone in hand, this is a bit of strange imagery. And I think a wingless stone is quite a strange image to think about. But if it's a wingless stone, it means it hasn't been thrown. So almost think of like, skipping stones on a river. And if the stone is wingless, it's almost like it hasn't set flight yet. It hasn't been thrown. So perhaps this indicates, and we're going to read on to the next line before I explain this, and a thread of anger snaking from their eyes. So if you think of a thread of anger, what this anger could be cast towards is this, anger and, confrontation and violence towards the colonial government and their actions, the colonial empire, which caused their deaths and the deaths of so many others, which spark more anger. And if you think about that, it's quite an interesting cycle. So the deaths, so people would fight against the colonial empire, right, because they were angry at what they were doing. And then when the colonial government retaliates or kills those people, then there's even more anger amongst African people to fight back. So that anger can refer to that. And the thread of anger snaking from their eyes is in itself an interesting concept, because a thread is something thin, but a thread is like, if you think of your clothes, it's everywhere, all over your clothes. It's sort of like within every molecule or with every aspect of your essence. And snaking has really dangerous connotations, right? If you think of a snake, you think of something volatile and dangerous. It shows that the anger is deep and threaded through them. So these men who have died have this, and if you think of eyes as well, eyes are your window to your soul. It's sort of, they have this intent, they have this angry intent, they have this desire to fight for themselves, to fight for their country. And that can go back to the wingless stone. It's almost like this intended violence has maybe not been committed. They weren't able to express their anger in as much as how extreme it was before they were killed. They had so much anger, and it didn't even like get to play out. But it could also refer to something a little more subtle. Maybe they had so much to give the world, but their stone is uncast due to their violent deaths. So just like we spoke about at daybreak, like how tragic their deaths are, this wingless stone, and they had all of this to give, but they were not able to cast their stone. So sort of two different interpretations of that image. If we look at the structure, there's lots of repetition, so that emphasizes that this is a really authentic plea. Lots of enjambment, the continuation of the plight, of the struggle. Free verse once again emphasizes how it's sincere and authentic. The theme and the message: exile, fighting for freedom and the dangers or consequences, anger, the cost of war, grief and isolation. The tone is different at different times, so pick and choose the correct word according to the line that you are referencing. Demanding, angry, somber, melancholic, ardent, impassioned and earnest. Ardent, impassioned, earnest, similar words meaning like very passionate, very sort of motivated or enthused to say what you want to say. The mood is somber and serious. I hope that you found that video helpful and has given you a little bit more information about the poem. I hope that you will like this video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.